In this video, we will be testing a React application with Cypress and the testing library for React. Let's get started by installing a demo project with the Create React app. The first thing we want to do is open our package.json, and we're going to add a script to be able to start our dev server and run our test runner. Now if you have the npm scripts extension installed, we can hit Command or Control B, click on our task, and run. And when Cypress first runs, you'll see a bunch of example test files. We can go ahead and clear out those example tests, as we will create a new one and walk through how to do that. So now there's no test files showing up. We'll create a test file called demo.feature.tsx. To make a test, we will need a describe block. Inside of our describe, we will need an it block. And now we can make a basic assertion. Now IntelliSense comes up with to equal, but we would like the dot equal that comes with chai. So to do that, we'll add a reference. Now IntelliSense will give us the methods that come with Cypress. So we make our equal true. We can flip back over to the test runner. Okay, now we can see that true equals true and our Cypress test runner is running, but we want to see the preview on the right hand side. So we can come up here and delete our basic assertion and replace it with the sci.visit. Save that, come back to our test runner, and now we can see that it's visiting our URL and that we have our application loaded. We'll do one minor cleanup. We'll move the base URL into a cypress.json. Inside this file we have a base URL. Set that as our base URL, come back, view our test runner one more time, and now we can see instead of the full URL, we can see that it's going to the basic route. Now let's add our first functional test and assert that Learn React is on the page. So sci.contains Now we can come back to the test runner and see that Learn React is on the page. If we need help with figuring out what to select, we can click the selector tool and see that we can also select by the class name. We'll put that right above. Come back to our test runner. Now we can see that there's two assertions. One that the class is there, and then one that is asserting that the text Learn React is there. If we open up the application file, we can go ahead and delete something, save it, and go over to the test runner, refresh, and assert that it is actually making the assertion. It'll time out and say it cannot find Learn React, so we know that we have a good test. Put that back, go ahead and save it, flip it over, run the test again, and it found React, so everything is good. To make this test a little bit better, we know that the Learn React is inside of the class, so we'll say within. This takes a function, move this up into the within, so now it's saying that Learn React shows up within the class. Save it, rerun our test runner. Now we can see that asserting correctly. Just to make sure, we'll move the text below the anchor, come back, refresh. So now it's failing. Even though that Learn React is on the page, it's not within the anchor class. Come back, move it back up, save the file, rerun the test. everything's good. Now that we have a Cypress functional test, let's flip over to our unit test. If we run this test now, it's just seeing that it renders without crashing. Okay, our tests are running. So let's do the same thing, but this time use the testing library for React. And get rid of these 3 lines and replace it with just 1 line. We call render, then pass it our component name. I'll save it, and our test runs. So this is doing exactly what the other test was doing. It's mounting it, it's rendering it, and everything looks good. You can do a little cleanup. Okay, so now that it's mounting and rendering and running, let's go ahead and make an assertion. So this render function returns back an object that we can pull out a couple of different methods. One is get by text. We're going to make an assertion that our learn react is on the page, but this time at the unit level. So get by text, learn react. Go ahead and run that. So now our test is running. We'll flip over to our Cypress test just to make sure we haven't broken anything. Everything looks good. Now with the 2 tests in place, now we can refactor a little bit and do some cleanup. Switching these to named exports instead of default exports. So now I'd like to split our component into a presentational component and a container-based component. So to do that, we're going to rename our presentational component to app component. If we save this, we'll see our unit test fails, and if we flip over to our Cypress test runner, we can see that's failing, and that's okay because we have those 2 tests, so as long as we get back to a passing state, everything will be great. So we have our component. Let's make our container. And then from our container, we'll just call our presentational component. If we save this, our unit test is working, and then we can refresh Cypress, and then now that's working. So okay, now we're back to a good state. So our next step is to remove the hard-coded values and allow the app component to be able to accept props. So something like message as props. And at this point, we realize that we can either pass props into the app component or just directly to the app component. So let's rename the app to app component because we want to target our presentational component directly. Okay, now that we save that, we'll add the types, allow it to accept props. Now we can remove our hard-coded React or our learn React and put it in from message. We click save, and our unit test passes, but if we refresh our Cypress test, now that's failing. So we're seeing an error that our container component needs to pass message as props to our presentational component. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So if we click save, come back to our Cypress test runner, look, everything looks good. But we don't want to have it hard-coded. Let's pull the message from this.state. and replace that hard-coded value with our message that we get from this.state. So we can make a type for our props. Also one for our state. State needs to have message inside of it. Message is of type string. So if we save it now, we can see that there's no errors in our editor, but if we flip over to Cypress, we're seeing that state is not initialized. So to fix that, we'll make a constructor, initialize our this.state, now we don't want to have to specify a default value for message, so we can say and any, so this will say that it should have message inside of it, or any as a default state. If we refresh our Cypress test runner, oh, we saw an issue with the props, so we'll just copy and paste that, save it. Now if we rerun our test, everything is looking good, except for we don't have our learn react. So now that we have messages coming from this.state, let's actually call an API to be able to get a message, and then we'll save it into state and it'll render as props. For now, we're just going to call an API.json that we will provide. If we save it now and refresh the browser, Cypress will actually tell us that we're calling an API, but we're getting a 404. If we open up our DevTools and click our API call, we can see more details in the console below, see our response. So for the demo purpose, we will go ahead and make our API.json in our public folder. So we're just calling our local project. We created the file, we'll go ahead and save it, come back over to the test runner, and refresh our test. Now that 404 turns into a 200. We click on it, we can see that it's a 200 response, but we are not getting anything back from the body. So let's go ahead and give it a response. Message, learn React. Save it, go ahead and come back. Now we can see that it's doing 200 and the body comes back with learn React. This is just showing some of the iterative capabilities that you can get with Cypress. So now that we know that our request is coming back with the data that we want, now we should be able to pull it out of our response and set it as state. Okay, now we can call this .setState with our message. Save it, and we see that our unit test passed. If we refresh our Cypress test, and now everything's passing, and we have learn React. Everything is good. We did an outside to in testing with started with our Cypress functional test, and then got our unit test working, and then worked backwards to make sure that they're both passing. If we run the Cypress run command, we can see that they will run without the browser, so this is how we can run it on the command line or in our CI pipeline. For the next step, we got a call from the live API, but we don't always want to call the live API during our test, so let's go over recording and mocking a server response. To do this, we start with site.server, and then we can say site.route and specify the URL that we want to have mocked. So using our testing tools, we can click on the API call and just copy the value right from the console. Come back to our editor. Now if we refresh our test, we can see that same call is being made, but now it's an XHR stub and it's being mocked. We can come in, give it a default value. Come back, refresh our test. So now that it's coming back with the value that we want, notice that our test is still failing because it doesn't have learn react. So let's go ahead and put learn react. So now that we have a mocked test and we are playing back the server response, sometimes we actually do want to hit the live API. So let's copy this test, paste it below. We will have one test suite that is mocked, and then one that is a real API call. So we'll remove the route and the server call that mocks the call. And this is useful to make sure that we've asserted that our app works as expected when we have a mocked response, but also that calling the real API has a full test all the way through. Now if our API contract ever changes, we can just click it and save. Now we refresh our test, and now we see that our app is working as expected, but our call to our API is not what we expected, causing our app to break. So that's an example of being able to use the Cypress testing for both our app, but also to assert our API contracts.